Hey, good afternoon. Scott Luton, Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's live stream. Greg, good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well, Scott Luton. How are you?
You remind me of Ernest
I'm
T.
feeling
Bass, how you
I'm
said
feeling
that.
spicy today, man. So
Well, we've got a great show teed up. We've got a
yeah,
great featured guest. We could have spent 3 hours in the warm-up session, picking his brain. So stay tuned.
again, we are outclassed and outeducated by our
That's
guests.
right. And so, speaking of Andrew Kelley III, the Chief Commercial Officer at BoxLock, is going to be our special guest here around 12:15, 12:20. So stay tuned because he is a leader on the move, and you're not going to want to miss him.
I just like to issue a challenge since I see a bunch of people signing up. Andrew Kelley III. I would like people who are in the stream to guess where Andrew Kelley III might have gotten one or more college degrees. You could be right twice.
Right. Oh boy! And good morning. Let's see here. Selah, Benjamin, Stefan, Robert, and Jeffrey. Good morning, everybody. And Stefan, by the way, Andrew hails from the Dallas area, so he is a neighbor of yours. So
yeah, he's a transplant also, Stefan. So,
that's right. All right. So with no further ado, hey, this is all about supply chain buzz, right? Some of the latest and biggest developments across global supply chain. Greg and our aim is to help you increase your supply chain IQ. So stay tuned as we do that. Hey, quick programming up before we dive into the first story. Greg, if folks enjoy these live stream episodes, they should check out our podcast. Today, Greg, we published an outstanding conversation with Keith Saunders, a senior supply chain executive with one of your favorite companies, Zep Incorporated.
Zep. First of all, I just love the name of the company. And Keith has a ton of experience. And I mean, he's worked at some fantastic companies. Listen up.
That's right.
What Keith has to say.
Huge. Not only did we dive into his journey, but he really weighed in with some perspective on his approach when it comes to procurement and sourcing. So great episode. You can check that out wherever you get your podcast from. Okay, holy cow, we've got a bunch of folks. I'm not going to be able to recognize all of them, but Konstantinos tuned in from Greece via LinkedIn. Mohammed also tuned in via LinkedIn. Good morning to you both. Melanie, good morning. And Sylvia. Hey, Sylvia, great to have you back. Look forward to having you, I believe, on a live stream in a couple weeks. Tamer, AA, Professor Mohib, good morning to you.
At the keeper of the planes there. See that? That's that guy right there.
That is right. Professor Mohib is in the air capital of the world in Wichita, Kansas. So great to have everybody. Hey, Ramatu is tuned in. So great to have you. I tell you, we've gotten so much feedback on your perspective last week on the live stream.
No kidding.
And just want to give you another high five. Love your take on leadership. You're meaningful and moving the needle. No lip service. It's all about real action-oriented leadership, and really enjoyed you being here with us. Okay, so Greg, let's dive into the first story of the day. How about that?
Let's do that.
Yeah. All right.
You start.
Yeah. So I hate to kick things off on some really bad news, but the biggest story and the biggest tragedy from last week is this explosion in the port of Beirut. I've got some interesting insights here as this story continues to develop. So unfortunately, 154 people now at least have died with thousands of injuries. Rescue and recovery efforts are still underway. Those numbers, of course, could be further impacted. But the investigation into exactly what triggered the massive blast is also making progress. So it's being reported that a vessel carrying, of course, a huge stockpile of ammonium nitrate arrived at the port of Beirut in September 2013. But it was abandoned by its owners and crew, according to, I think, Al Jazeera. Its cargo was offloaded after it was abandoned into a structure, of course, called Hangar 12 that we've all heard so much about, 7 years back. Lebanese customs officials, though, didn't lose any sight or visibility of this cargo. This is just the really frustrating part of this, which it could have all been avoided. So it's being reported that the customs officials sent 6 letters over the years to an unnamed judge asking for the port to take action and warning about the danger that the ammonium nitrate posed. So many opportunities. And to give folks context, in case they're new to the port of Beirut, 60% of Lebanon's imports come through this port. So huge tragic setback here. Extraordinary impact for the Lebanese people. So on CBS News, Greg, over the weekend, I believe, Lebanon's UN ambassador, Mr. Amal Moudallali, mentioned one of the areas impacted is the availability of food in the country. Evidently, he said that large stockpiles of wheat were destroyed in addition to all the other destruction in the blast. So I tell you, all the best to the Lebanese people. He also, in that same interview, talked about just how difficult the last 30 or 40 years has been in Lebanon. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, hey, we deserve a break. The Lebanese people need a break. And this is just the latest tragedy and setback that they're having to deal with. So any thought, what have you been tracking the story as well, Greg?
A little bit. So as it turns out, one of the largest groups in Wichita, Kansas, which AA can attest to, is a huge Lebanese population. So I know many people who still have connections to the old country. And I know the government has been in shambles for decades. It's well known that it's poorly run and very corrupt.
Yep.
I had heard something about, and you might know more about this. There was some sort of fireworks or welding or something going on in the facility next to this. And for folks who don't know, ammonium nitrate is fertilizer. It's just it's a component of fertilizer. It's just a very, very unstable component of fertilizer until it's mixed with the other chemicals to stabilize it for fertilizer. So, and this was a huge amount of product. So I know it's harmed the ability obviously, I think it has ceased, at least temporarily, the ability for the port to operate. And I don't know that they know. I don't know that anyone could know, because ministers are dropping so fast in terms of resignations that again, a government that was already in disarray is losing members of the cabinet, and there's calls to eliminate the cabinet as well, right? So this will be a big disruption, obviously.
Massive.
In addition to the human tragedy.
Yes. Clay mentions, of course, one of our quarterbacks, the dog here at Supply Chain Now, 27.5 thousand tons of ammonium nitrate in that Hangar 12. And to put it in some context, the OKC, the Oklahoma City Bombers, used 2 tons. And we all saw the destruction there. So I tell you that the various videos that have been proliferating out since the blast, it is just, it's mind-numbing. From the actual blast itself to, of course, just how widespread that destruction's been. So our prayers and thoughts are certainly with the people of Lebanon. The good news is here, and there's always good news if you look for it. In that same interview with CBS News, the Mr. Moudallali talked about how overwhelmed it's been to see all the support coming in from the international community. So that really is much needed and a good way to put a cap on this story for now. So,
could be a catalyst for change there. One can only hope, right?
That's right. So Jeffrey comes in with a quick clarification. He's saying 2,700. It's 2,700.
Yeah,
I think 1,000.
Yeah, I think that was a
little slip of the tongue here on my end. That's right. So almost 3,000 metric tons of ammonium nitrate. Okay, so let's move on to something that is much, much, much lighter. And here in the Metro Atlanta area, of course, we hear a lot about the Home Depot all the time. But they made a big splash across the business community with their news last week, Greg. So they have announced their plans to continue expanding their supply chain footprint. As reported by the one and only Supply Chain Dive, Home Depot is going to be adding 3 distribution centers, all in the metro Atlanta area. It's part of an effort by the company to continue to ramp up its ability to meet growing demand in the do-it-yourself market. Everyone's home, and so I saw it put either an article or somewhere else that you start seeing all the improvement opportunities when you've been home for several months. So 3 facilities, and this is how they're gonna operate. The largest site, Greg's going to focus on store replenishment, mainly in the southeastern U.S. The second site is going to serve as what they call a flatbed delivery center, so all about next day delivery of bulky orders. And then the third site is going to be focused on same and next day delivery of maintenance, repair, and operations products, all for business to business customers. Expected time frame for all 3 to come online is 18 months. Project is part of the $1.2 billion, as in with a B as in Bezos, investment in its distribution network, which was announced back in 2017. So get this, Greg, this is an interesting quote here. We were talking pre-show about speaking with confidence, and our listeners are going to see that momentarily. But in late May at an industry conference, Home Depot CEO Craig Manier gave an interesting quote. Quote, "Through all of this, for the most part, we've been able to maintain the continued development of the supply chain. You'll see us move forward through 2020 pretty much as planned," end quote. How about that for confidence?
Pretty good.
Pretty good, huh? All right, one last point here. I'm going to get you to weigh in, Greg, and we'll take some comments from the audience. Home Depot seemed to get a head start in the retail industry on really investing in their supply chain infrastructure, which started in 2017, really as they reappeared on the Gartner top 25 supply chain rankings.
Right.
So we need to borrow their crystal ball, Greg. What do you think?
Well, they desperately needed it in 2017. I mean, they had been lagging pretty significantly. They had some leadership changes in that area. We've actually met one of their top supply chain leaders. She was on the first U.S. bank freight payment index discussion, right? And clearly they have upskilled in that area, and they knew they needed to. I won't name any names, but I have some inside information on supply chain and supply chain tech at Home Depot, and they have been upgrading for nigh on a decade now. And if just finally, I think 2-3 years ago, finally reached that inflection point where they're bringing things into a much, much more modern phase, and just in the nick of time also. So well done on their part. And this, their ability to be agile and do this is impressive. And of course, it's really easy to stay on plan when your sales go up dramatically rather than down, because you have all that capital and stock appreciation that allows you to do that. So I'm glad to see it happening for any company, but particularly for Big Orange, and and particularly as it frankly benefits the Atlanta area.
Agreed. So, and we've reached out again. We've had a variety of Home Depot leaders on the programming with us. We've reached out, and we'll see if we can get one of their supply chain leaders on to speak to just this latest round of investment. So good stuff there. A couple of great comments from the audience. Jamin is here with us. Jamin had a great first episode in the logistics and transportation series last week. Jamin says the Home Depot has definitely been leading the way in seeing their supply chain as an area to leverage as a competitive advantage. That's a great point. And in our fourth story today, near the end, we're going to be talking about that, especially in light of all the retail struggles. Chris Barnes says the Home Depot has a good distribution network already. Curious to see the project they did to analyze the effect of adding in 3 new facilities. Great stuff there from Mr. Supply Chain is Boring.
That is that's a really good point, because there are other retailers who are adding to their supply chain network. And I would argue that one particular case we discussed several weeks ago, Target putting sort of a interim fulfillment center between the store and the consumer, that still confuses me. But all 3 of these locations seem like logical and logically separated.
Great point.
So that the consumer business doesn't get stepped on by the commercial business.
Good point. Claudia makes a great point. Being declared essential was key. Great point there, Claudia. And one more here. Jeffrey says, not to detract from Home Depot's success, but demand forecasting and anticipation is less complex for this sector than for others. Market signals and counterbalances are easier to analyze, and they've been profitable in the past couple of years. Man,
true,
Jeff,
all true. But as usual, Jeffrey, I have a counter to your point. Jeff and I, we go back and forth offline all the time, so that is a good point. But the uplift in consumer business is really significantly difficult to forecast, particularly as per COVID. And we also, just a quick note, we aren't hearing anything about Lowe's excellence in supply chain right now, right? Although Ace Hardware is kicking butt right now also. So I don't think it's coincidental. I don't think that it's, to Jeff's point, I don't think it's necessarily an indicator of excessive excellence over the competition. It's just that some teams are better than others, and I can vouch for the teams at both Ace and Home Depot.
Great point. Great exchanges there. Okay, one last comment before we bring in our special guest. So evidently there's a trend taking place called #HireBen. And I think he's talking about Benjamin Goldklang, who I think will be graduating soon. And Joseph Valentine is taking it upon himself to start this massive advertising campaign.
I like it.
I like that too.
Well, who originated Hire Latia? Was that you, Scott?
No, I think that was you, Greg. Wasn't me.
But was it me?
We like these trends. I mean, we've got great people, talented people in this listening audience, and there's going to be companies that are going to really benefit from their thought leadership and just their sheer talent. So we're with you, Joseph Valentine. We're big fans of the HireBen movement.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's, with no further ado, I'll pull this out here. We've got a great guest here today. You're in for a treat. We're going to be welcoming in Andrew Kelley III, the Chief Commercial Officer at BoxLock. Hey, good afternoon, Andrew. How you doing, sir?
I am doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, welcome aboard. I have to tell you, I don't know if you were listening backstage, but I put the challenge out to our audience to try to express where a guy named Andrew Kelley III might have gone to college. And nobody really took me up on it, but I figured it would be obvious with the third that you went to some pretty prestigious schools.
Yeah, well, a lot of good mentors that I found along the way, a lot of hustle, a lot of debt.
Well, so all right, so Greg, we can't leave him in the lurch. So Andrew, we were talking prior to coming on. We should have recorded that conversation on the front and released that. I think that would have been an intriguing podcast discussion. But before we talk more about BoxLock for a second, let's get a little bit of your background. I mean, you've got an incredible pedigree, but tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I grew up on the eastern shore of Maryland on a working produce farm. So think cantaloupe, watermelon, corn, sweet potatoes, cucumbers, grew it all, packed it all, shipped it all. And so there was no greater motivation to go to school and do well than being in the growing season from sunup to sundown, repeating every single day through the growing harvest. So went to NC State for undergrad, mechanical engineering, then straight to grad school to MIT, worked in the 3D printing lab back in the day, and then went to the dark side to the other side of the Charles River to get a business degree from Harvard. And so that stood me fairly well. But, in my heart of hearts, I'm a startup guy. And there's a part of me that thinks that I didn't need any of that education and I could just kind of grind it out and figure it out along the way. But I'm still happy I have the degrees.
Well, I can tell you that it doesn't hurt to have the degrees, but it is still grinding it out in startup, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you've also seen the light side, right? You've seen the good side of the force, and probably having been in Boston so long, you've seen the dark side of the force as well. Those being the VCs and PE companies. So you can take care of Brad and Rusty and the team at BoxLock really well, knowing what they're dealing with.
And I was a corporate venture capitalist for a little bit, right? And so know a little bit about how those guys think. And you mentioned Boston, right? So the Bay Area, Israel, China, those are places where a lot of venture dollars get deployed into early stage companies. And so I think I have a decent understanding of it from both sides of the table. And so hopefully that helps me a little bit.
Well, so Andrew, BoxLock is a company that folks are going to hear a lot more about in the months to come. We had, Greg and I were fortunate to sit down back at Modex last week before the world changed here in the States and learn a lot more about the BoxLock story. But for folks that may not, for the three people that had not heard of BoxLock, tell folks what it's about.
Sure. So basically, BoxLock got started in 2017 because the founders' parents kept getting their parcels stolen from their porch. And so this product did not exist, was created, and it basically defeats porch pirates. I came in 3 months ago because on the B2B side, I think there's a tremendous opportunity. As opposed to selling 1 or 2 per household, we can sell 1 or 2 dozen per business location or opportunity. And so on the business side, in healthcare, in lab logistics, in manufacturing, in private fleets, there's the opportunity to secure assets that are high value or high criticality, and also combine the connectivity that we have so that we're basically replacing physical keys with digital keys in a smart way, right? And so our customers come to us because they have a security need, they have an unattended delivery need, they have an inventory management need, and we can do all of that.
I think the coolest thing, that's really cool, Andrew. The coolest thing about it for me is that your UPS driver, your FedEx, Amazon Prime driver, whoever, they can just scan the lock, pop it open, drop it in, lock it back, and walk away. And you don't have to worry about the neighbor kids, right, taking your brand new Chiefs jersey off your front porch. I'm not saying that's happened.
Yeah, look, I'm going to do like a real time demo.
But I'm looking at you, neighbor kid.
Right. And so, they scan the lock, right? There's a barcode right here, and the lock pops open. It's just that easy, right? So that's your 5-second demo right there, guys.
Love it.
I'm so glad you did that. I just need to see that every once in a while.
Yeah. So Michael from Procurement Foundry is with us here today. Michael, hope this finds you well. He makes a great point here. Smart stuff could be used in a lot of the shared office space as well. Is that an area, Andrew, that you're seeing? So
in shared office space, not as much, but for sure, we can secure any cubic volume, right? So if it's a shared office space where, for example, somebody's got particular items that they want to control, it could be laptops, it could be special gear that they use for their particular business. And if you've got, let's say, 10 different companies or people kind of rotating in and out of a space, and you want to secure like a cabinet or a locker or a cage or something like that, we can absolutely do that, right? So in manufacturing, securing tool cribs is one of the things that we're purpose made for, right? With lab logistics. So if you ever gone to the doctor and seen one of those little white boxes where they put your blood sample in after the fact, well, those things are typically pretty flimsy, right? And some places they're not even really bolted down to anything, right? And so we can secure those so that your specimens. So, for example, in the state of New Jersey, COVID samples that are older than 5 days have to be retaken. Right. But you may burn a whole day just on the logistics and collections and going to empty specimen boxes. That doesn't make any sense in this day and age with the technology that we have. Right. And so we can secure any cubic volume anywhere with our connectivity and barcode scanner.
Greg and I are big fans. We were back when we first saw it in person several months back. It's fascinating, and the growth that we're watching BoxLock go through is fascinating. You've added a lot of talent to the team. Andrew, we're talking about that pre-show, so it's exciting. We're going to keep you on our radar and see the heights that BoxLock is going to be reaching in the months to come. So let's shift gears a little bit, Andrew, because Greg and I both are really looking forward to you kind of weighing in and telling us what's on your radar when you look at global supply chain and the business world and this unique environment we're in 2020. And what are some of the things that sticks out to you?
Yeah, so no question, it's e-commerce, right? So I haven't been on a plane since February. So the last in-person show that I actually spoke at was Parcel Forum in October. And I remember telling the audience then that Pitney Bowes had said that basically the average American gets about 23 parcels per year. Right. And the audience looked at me as though I had two heads. What are you talking about? I get that many a month, right? And now with COVID, right, that number is probably skyrocketed. And so thinking about ground execution and supply chain in general, right, we've all seen this sort of reduction in length of haul for full truckload or over-the-road trucking, right? The average length of haul has been declining for the last 15 years or so, and now it's probably about 400 miles, right? And this is because there are more warehouses and distribution centers and sortation centers that are dotting the landscape on the periphery of dense urban environments where that inventory, those parcels need to get to. And so I think that what's starting to happen is we're moving from full truckload to LTL to parcel, and e-commerce clearly is one of the major drivers of that, right? So that's direct to consumer. That's also, folks that are crowdsourcing their delivery. It's kind of all permutations of just shy of putting inventory in your house, which of course, Amazon and Walmart actually want to do. And if you sign up for that, they'll figure out a way you can have them have someone put groceries like in your fridge, And so people may not be ready for that, right? But for sure, like one of the things that's starting to happen is that inventory and micro inventory is getting closer and closer to end consumption. And so that's a fundamental shift that's been happening in supply chain for a while, right? And so I think that's pretty important. The other thing is, obviously the news cycle has moved on a little bit, but PPE or personal protective equipment, right? So that's not a new term in healthcare and manufacturing, but it's a new term for most Americans, right? And if you look at Google Trends, which is sort of like the analytical tool that will allow you to figure out like what words are trending. So PPE has not been trending as much, but when I talk to folks on the front line in healthcare and they're telling me about how their linens and laundry business is going through the roof because they're trying to rewash PPE, or when I talk to global 3PLs that have stood up businesses to import PPE from anywhere they can get their hands on it across the planet because it's still in short supply. These are people that are like right on the front lines doing like the dirty work that you'll probably never hear about, right? But that's the stuff where occasionally we'll see something on the news where it's a doctor or a nurse that are talking about like these kinds of things, but it's happening every day all over the place, right? So in supply chain healthcare in particular, there are lots of areas, whether it's at hospitals or ambulatory surgical centers or labs they're in, or it's kind of other providers. There are lots of things in the supply chain that are not maybe as efficient as they ought to be, right? And so there's those top 10 hospitals in the world that have tens of thousands of employees down to, I think in the US, we're down to maybe about 100 or a couple hundred like community clinics, right? Because there's been such massive consolidation. And so hospital complexes are kind of exactly that these days. They're big business, right? And so due to all that consolidation, theoretically, the supply chain should be tighter, but there are lots of moving parts in order to deliver care, right? So that's another thing. And then I think finally, in supply chain, one of the things that has been happening is, there's a confluence of visibility and data and security, right? And I'm talking to customers about like what keeps them up at night. Security is almost always a top three, right? And so it's the security you see and the security you don't see, right? So one of the things that seems like it's abated in 2020 is these massive data breaches where you hear like credit card company X or bank Y just lost 1 million records of consumer data, right? And so, that's more on the logical security side, but there's also a physical element of this as well, right? And so if that's, risk management for lab companies, or if that's HIPAA compliance for healthcare providers, or if that's just, kind of not getting your personal electronics stolen, right, as they're kind of coming to your house or to your business, security is a huge element in all of those different use cases.
All right, so Greg, we've got a couple questions from the audience, but I want to get you to weigh in on the knowledge that Andrew just dropped on us.
Well, I think those are all important points, right? And the final one, security, is the one that really jumps out at me. And I don't mean to loop us back to what it is BoxLock does, but I know Brad and we've actually talked with you before. So I'm curious about this question that Mervyn Daniel is asking. And I also have a question around, I know that the physical lock is not, it's a part of your business. It's the consumer part of your business, but you've also got a more enterprise type solution in mind as well. So can you answer Mervyn's question and then maybe address that particular thing? So his question is BoxLock applicable for freight operations too, like in case of a customs or trailer seal?
It absolutely is. And we're talking directly to full truckload companies about sealing trailer doors or sealing containers. So my experience in the import-export business is if the border patrol or the customs enforcement agents need to kind of get into a container, they're typically going to cut that seal off, right? Now, the benefit of our lock is that it's able to be opened kind of anywhere. So we can deliver a one-time digital key to a customs agent, or in over-the-road trucking, we can text that code to the receiving dock manager, at the destination for that trucker, right? So, in over-the-road trucking, typically, it's not going to be as multi-stop as your Pepsi trucks, your FedEx trucks, who may make 200 plus stops a day. Maybe there's going to be 5 stops, in a full truckload, 53-foot dry banner or reefer, right? And so in those cases where you want to know who actually had access to that truck, where and when, we can actually tie that to a specific employee or a badge number or a shipping receiving manager. So you've got a better chain of custody and an audit trail overall, right? And so
you can also limit who can have access to it. I mean, so
that's exactly right.
The days of cartons of cigarettes falling off the back of a trailer are over with BoxLock, right?
Exactly right? Because we've got a way for you to secure that load. And so it could be cartons of cigarettes, it could be alcohol, it could be munitions, it could be food and beverage. It doesn't really matter what's inside of the trailer. We can secure it all, right? And even if there is a cage inside of that trailer, there's another layer of security that can be applied on top of that as well. So we can do all of that.
All right. So clearly folks are intrigued, just like we knew they would be, with just the solution and all the various applications. Lisa, and good morning, Lisa, or good afternoon, Lisa, says, wow, this is a great idea to use to replace seals. Huge.
Well, having just watched The Irishman, right? I don't know if anyone else has watched that movie, but if you haven't, do. And
right.
You know what I'm talking about, Andrew. I mean, he was swiping stuff all the time on his way to his deliveries, and he even had a second tag, right? So never caught. Now every single opening is accountable, right?
That's exactly right.
One more comment here, Andrew.
Probably, Hunts Point in New York and probably Long Beach in California are probably a couple of like the hotspot ports for theft, right? For obvious reasons, right? Criminals, they go where the volume is, they go where the money is, right? And then separately, FreightWatch International, they're like a global security firm. They put like a heat map of like some of the other countries where security is like a big problem globally, right? And it's where you might expect, right? It's Brazil, it's South Africa, it's other places where, there's high value cargo, there's the ability to kind of intercept it and or divert those goods. Now, of course, in trucking, there's cargo insurance, and here in the U.S. there are a lot less fatalities. But I can tell you, like in going down to Brazil and talking to freight operators down there, the odds of drivers coming home after a hijacking are a lot less than they are in New York or in California.
I'm not laughing at you, Andrew. I'm laughing at Jeff's comment. He just says here, Greg, he says cigarettes falling off the back of trucks. Is Greg talking again about his teenage enterprises?
Goodfellas. I'm talking about Goodfellas. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So, yeah. Greg, I
love gangster movies. What can I say?
You're going to ask a question or a comment, Greg, to what Andrew just talked about?
Well, I know there is a more virtual, a less physical aspect of your enterprise solution. So can you explain that to folks, Andrew?
Sure. So, we happen to make a lock, but we're really in the recurring revenue business, right? Because the reason that our customers come to us is because they need that ongoing security. They need that ongoing audit logging. It may be a month or at the end of the quarter or even at the end of the year that they want to look back and they want that data to kind of figure out like what is their security posture, right? They want that ability to send digital keys either to their employees or to people that are interacting in and around their locations, right? And so it could be a cleaning crew who's coming into a manufacturing plant, right? Who needs certain access to the cleaning materials. It could be an HVAC crew that's coming into an ambulatory surgical center, right? They need access to a certain area. right? Obviously, for lab logistics, right? It's the collection companies, it's the medical couriers that are picking up these specimens, and so think urology, toxicology, dermatology, right? All the ologies, right? So those specialists that are testing for particular types of benign or otherwise samples, from folks. And let's be honest, like right now, it's almost all COVID all the time. COVID is crowding out a lot of that other business, and for good reason. Right. We need to do more testing, and hopefully that helps us save some lives, right? But from a very practical perspective, it's really the ongoing data availability that our customers come to us for, and that's what really drives us to a recurring revenue business model. And we happen to sell locks as well.
Yeah, fascinating. Antonio says, "Hey, without data, businesses are lost." That's a great point, Andrew. Chris mentions, what's that?
Data is the new bacon.
That's right.
Not as tasty, but.
That's right. Chris referenced a previous guest, Spotsy, Angie over there at Spotsy, and says how if you combine Spotsy and BoxLock, you could have that perfect delivery. That's an interesting thought.
So think about this. I mean, as long as we're talking about past guests, let's take three of the most mundane things that all of us take for granted every day. A lock. Right. Mm-hmm. Verticality, which is what spots, right? Is it right side up? Right. And tracking the pallet that the stuff is on. I mean, imagine the Pallet Alliance and their digital pallets and Spotsy and this all together to combine to make sure it gets there on time, unmolested and unbroken. That is a great combination. And that gets us this close to paperless. Yes. Right. And it's funny because one of the articles that I was researching, didn't select, but researching, was how important paperless is becoming in the new environment, right? Because it's not not about whether you can actually communicate COVID or any other disease by physical touch, but it's about people's comfort with that physical touch. And frankly, don't we all think it's time for paper to go away?
I'm with you. I hate touching anything if I know even one person has touched it. Yeah, especially you, Greg. Hey, question here, Andrew, from your fellow, what they call folks who live in Dallas. Is it Dallasites? Well, regardless, Stefan's one of your neighbors. I don't know either. We'll see if someone will look it up. He says, does BoxLock only provide the locks and the tracking, or also lock visibility with locations and movements?
The latter and more, right? And so the lock enables a lot of things because we've got electronics inside, and so that's how we get connectivity, right? So we have Wi-Fi right now. After Labor Day, we'll have cellular connectivity. Right. And the barcode scanner allows us to scan either a one-dimensional vertical barcode or a QR code, which is basically a 2D barcode, which is, I think, up to like 3 kilobytes of data. So it's a more data dense code. So there's more information that's in it. Right. And in terms of the data that we can provide, you mentioned position. So, latitude, longitude, and elevation, that's going to be, in the solution that comes out after Labor Day. Right. And so, if you are in the container storage business, right. And so as we're talking to customers there, they may drop a container, anywhere in the country, and, they just want to know where it is to be working with pickups. Or if you're in the multi-stop routing business and you are routing customers either for like lab logistics, like I talked about, or for food and beverage, or for any kind of combinatorial math problem where you've got multiple vehicles, multiple stops, and it gets super complicated and you can't do it on a whiteboard, we can provide information back to that routing so you can get closer to on-demand pickup and delivery, which is going to save you fuel, it's going to be more efficient, and you're going to get more stops per day, which is what you want for a routing company.
Love it. Hugo, which is a first-time live stream participant here with us at Supply Chain Now. He hails from Colombia in South America. He says this innovation represents a great opportunity for the security of high-cost medicines, and that's what we're hoping to be in a lot more in the months to come. So interesting applications to be found there.
Absolutely.
Tamer.
A quick point on that. So we're talking to clinical research organizations or CROs, right, who are in the business of running those clinical trials that deliver medicines to patients for kind of improved healthcare. And so, yes, that makes a ton of sense to us.
Yep. And Claudia weighs in. Claudia, I hope this finds you well. This product is a great example of IoT and smart cities. Good stuff there.
As cities move from just thinking about cars only to also thinking about mopeds and bikes and pedestrians and sort of multimodal transportation, particularly in dense urban environments, right? Whether you need to lock up any of those modes of transportation or things at a particular stop where people can congregate, socially distanced, of course, and secure things that they may need as you kind of reimagine, morning commute.
All right, so Stefan weighs in, going back to what we were asking, what you call folks live in Dallas, and Stefan, who lives in Dallas, says we're called cowboys or partners. So,
How about that?
It's Botnet.
Yes, yeah. Right, with a D. Yeah. All right, so Andrew, I hate to tamp down the conversation here. We want to have you back. Fascinating technology, and I'm more intrigued. We knew the product was very unique and innovative, but then the talent that y'all have been able to, between you and some other fairly new members of the team, I mean, holy cow, y'all really are combining. It's a perfect storm. Really quick, one last question before we make sure folks know how to connect with you. You made some hires here recently. Talk about the talent market in a Reader's Digest manner. What is your quick observation there?
Yeah. So, I go out of my way to be helpful to people that are searching right now because there are so many people out of a job, right? And frankly, for my first hire, I try to pay back my LinkedIn network, and I posted it there as like, people, for everybody who's helped me along the way in my journey, now is the time. If you've got a friend or a friend of a friend who is looking for an opportunity, please hit me up, right? And so, the reality is there is a ridiculous amount of talent on the street right now, some of whom, to no fault of their own, wrong place, wrong time, last hired, first fired, just pure happenstance. For the 2 sales makers I just hired last month, I interviewed 35 different candidates, right? So that's like an acceptance rate that is, harder than MIT's acceptance rate of like 7%, right? And like the guy behind the guy was amazing too. I wish I had more job recs, right? So I could hire more of the people that I actually saw, right? And so the overall hiring environment right now, I'd say it's certainly an employer's market, but don't abuse that, right? Because the last thing you want to do is sort of like over leverage your position and pull someone kind of out of the market and like undercut them on salary or bait and switch them. And trust me, that will come back to bite you, because culture eats strategy. And if you're going to build a culture that's based on distrust, you're not going to be around.
I'm with you. I am.
Yeah.
That you're absolutely right. And we've all probably at one point or other, if we haven't worked in, we've at least rubbed elbows with companies that had no trust in the culture. And you see the expression on the people's faces. They're miserable. And especially, I would argue that in 2020 and moving forward, as bad as those organizations and the cultures behind them were, it's going to be twice as bad, because folks aren't going to put up with it moving forward. All right, so Andrew, really enjoyed it. Let's make sure we've got all your information will be in the show notes, and then certainly on the podcast version of this conversation. But how can folks connect with you?
Yeah. So it's getboxlock.com. If you'd like to check out what we do, and for me personally, you could just hit me up on my LinkedIn.
It's just that simple. And you do want to. I've enjoyed your cartoon features, your animations each weekend. Folks, you want to be following or connecting, following, you name it, Andrew Kelley III, Chief Commercial Officer with BoxLock. Andrew, a pleasure, and we will have you back really soon.
Sounds good. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Take care. I have a quick note.
All right.
I have a quick note for Rusty Wiley, and that is talk to some of those folks in the comments feed there. There are a lot of questions around BoxLock, right?
Yep.
I think they see what we saw when we met Brad, or talked to Brad even before we met him, and then met him, Brad Rufkus, the CEO at Modex. So obviously building a great team there with Andrew. I have never heard somebody say combinatorial math so beautifully before.
Hey, better, I can mispronounce John Smith. So
Yeah, I was practicing in my head just so I could try to say it as well.
So, hey, Sam, greetings from Transport and Logistics Middle East in Dubai. Sam, hope this finds you well. Great to have you tuned in via Facebook. Also, real quick, before we get back to some of the news of the day, Daniel Hartnett, who over the past couple of days had shared some insights on some of our programming on LinkedIn, is joined us here today. Daniel, hope this finds you well. And I agree with you. I'm a big fan of that culture eat strategy perspective that Andrew shared. Okay. So, Greg, we're going to keep driving as much as we enjoyed that. I mean, Andrew, you and I both knew that he was going to bring it and that he would get the juices in the audience, moving.
Yeah.
And it really, I mean, there was a couple of questions we couldn't get to there, right?
Yeah, there's a few. So I'm not kidding, Rusty. I'm talking to you. If you wouldn't mind, get in there, and because they're almost all about BoxLock. So Rusty Wiley is one of the quality hires. One of the 2 out of 35. Is that what Andrew said he hired? That he actually got the job at BoxLock. So get to work, Rusty. All right. So hey, we next story. So we are. Scott's frozen, isn't he? So we are. Talking a lot about the P word, pivot, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit again, and that is some of these companies that have had to change how they operate in this new world, or at least even in the interim world. So, look, we're talking about reinvention in a lot of cases here. So let's talk about one of the markets that has changed really, really dramatically lately, and that is the food industry. And particularly, I want to talk about food service and restaurants and their suppliers. So we've all heard or seen stories about just masses of restaurants shuttering, sometimes for good. But let's talk about a couple of survival stories and how some of these companies have made their way in the world and how they continue to evolve to make things happen. All right. So one story in this article right here. Good timing, Scott. Thank you. It's the story of a wine bar in Indiana, and what the owner did there was she partnered with her food service distributor to sell consumer-sized meats, bread, milk, produce, and other things. So knowing after restaurants were closed and then reopened, people didn't rush back to get into restaurants. I think we can all account for that, right? But in order to scramble and help not only her business, but her distributor's business and the consumers, she started distributing as a grocery store would to her own customers, right? So a couple things. I want to distinguish in the rest of this conversation between food service and food distribution. So some of you know that I've dealt with this industry for quite some time. Food service services restaurants, anywhere that food is made for you. Food distribution services grocery. So it's a distinctly different business, and their fates have been polar opposites. Food distribution and grocery, of course, we all know most of us are cooking at home or at least warming things up at home. So that business has taken off. And the inverse effect, Scott, I know you know this because you guys only eat out or have it delivered, right? Maybe once a week or so. And I still think back, by the way, Scott, I still think fondly of the burgers at Station Side, right?
We miss them.
Our King Plow studio in West Midtown in Atlanta. Man, that's a great burger. Anyway, I'm sorry. But people are not going to restaurants like that. And I believe that Station Side is still closed, has not opened up. And who knows if it ever will at this point. But anyway, food service is half of the food industry. Food service being restaurants and that sort of thing. And they are expecting a 33% reduction in revenues in 2020. In April, industry sales, depending on the segment, even of the food service industry, and I'm going to address that here in just a second, between 60 and 90%. Imagine a scenario where your demand drops 90%. The only other industry I can think of is air travel, right? Where demand has dropped that much.
Right.
And another important aspect of food service that needs to be surfaced is that they typically have 10% gross margins and 1% or sometimes even negative net margins. So one of the products that we provide at Blue Ridge is a forward buying tool. It's hedging inventory. And that is the reason that we own the food service industry is because that is the almost sole way that a lot of those companies make profit, is by forward buying inventory when they get a discount, or when they get advance notice of an upcoming price increase. So those companies are really scrambling to make money as it is. You drop their business by 33 to 90%. Obviously, any company is going to struggle. So, so just to give you an idea, who else besides restaurants does food service hotels? They service hotels, by the way, as Chris Barnes acknowledges, they've been hit pretty hard by this. Anything in the travel industry, we know that Hertz recently went bankrupt.
Yep.
Also, but they service, and I'm going to go slow here because I want everybody to be able to internalize this. They service schools. They service hospitals, prisons, amusement parks, stadiums, colleges, and universities. So think about where their business is, and also think about the fate of those portions of the industry and what's the likelihood that business is coming back. So some food service distributors already have not made it. A company named Maine's Paper closed its broadline means selling to mom and pop restaurants, and several others. This beautiful navy blue, red, and yellow truck. And I'm sure people probably recognize these trucks. They probably didn't recognize the name, but I'm sure you've seen these trucks around your town, some of you. So interesting, they lost 65% of their business, laid off workers, and even the ones who stayed took pay cuts. But get how they shifted. And this, you may have heard about this in your town. And the point of this is there is opportunity here, even if that opportunity is just survival and kicking the can down the road until you can pivot again or business comes back or whatever happens. They started selling grocery and created a website in a weekend. Over a weekend, they created a website to sell direct to consumers, right? They repackaged to consumer sizes because a food service company sells like that, like you see on that truck. They sell in case packs and even in pallet quantities. They even delivered to neighborhood homeowners association facilities like the pool house or clubhouse or whatever, if you have such a thing in your neighborhood, and use that as a distribution point because so many people, even though grocery was open and booming, did not want to go to grocery stores. So it's not much, but it did keep the door open. And then they also adapted another part of their business, deli meats, and started providing that to other food service distributors and grocers. And that part of the business is actually up. So this continues to be a struggle for restaurants and for food service distributors. Food service distributors have to get what's called long in inventory. They have to buy inventory, assuming that someone is going to consume it. And as that is difficult for restaurants now, they're even extending credit to those restaurants in probably one of the worst environments that they've seen. So look, the point of this is these are resilient people, but they're only so resilient. So I'm going to encourage you to visit or order from your local restaurant, because the entirety of the survival of the food service distribution industry is based on food going out the door at all of these restaurants or food service facilities. So we consumers can do our part. We can't open schools if the schools aren't going to open. We can't open Six Flags although I'm really missing Batman the ride.
Scream Machine.
Yeah, wow, that's a blast from the past, isn't it? But seriously, go out if you're not already. Pick one night a week and rotate it if you have to. But pick a restaurant and support that restaurant, particularly the mom and pops, the small independent shops.
Outstanding. That's an outstanding challenge to put out there because, despite their most creative and innovative and effort field ways that they're trying to reinvent their model and serve and drive revenue, they need us, the consumer, to help at least on some level. So I love that. I love that sentiment, Greg.
How often can you do good for somebody by having a tasty, delicious meal delivered to you while you're streaming Netflix?
That's right.
Right.
All right. So love that story, Greg. And we'll keep tabs on that. I think, as we've talked about, nonstop, the innovation and the, hey, we got to figure out a different way to get it done. That so many stories out there as part of this hugely, uniquely challenging time.
Yeah.
There's going to be so much innovation that comes out of this period. That's part of the big silver lining here. Okay. So in our final story, and thanks for covering for me. Our data pipe out here has been down for 15 minutes or so. So we are operating via our 5G technology. We'll see how long. We'll see how long. Fortunately, no one's burned.
Verizon send Comcast the bill.
Yeah, seriously. Hey, fortunately, no one's burned our 5G towers out here in Walton County yet, but we'll see. Okay. Our final story of the day, and thanks to all the great comments. Holy cow, we could only get to about 20% of them, maybe. Between the stories and what Andrew was sharing, the BoxLock story, it really generated a lot of dialogue here today. So appreciate that to our audience. Okay. So in this last story, really neat article. Big theme for today's show is retail. It seems like that's been a big theme for a couple months now, especially our supply chain buzz. Great article from the Wall Street Journal, Suzanne Kapner, who wrote on the changing retail landscape. So Lord & Taylor, a prominent 194-year-old retailer, is close to being no more. Now, I'm kind of new to Lord & Taylor. Greg, you're the more fashionable of the two of us. You may be well aware of Lord & Taylor, but this was a new one for me.
I've never shopped there, but there was one next to the J.C. Penney's in our mall. So
that makes sense. That makes sense. Last week, the company's lenders said they plan to liquidate their holdings if they can't find a buyer for the company. But as we both know, Lord & Taylor find themselves with plenty of company in the situations that they are in right now. In May 2020 alone, we saw J.C. Penney, Neiman Marcus, and Stage stores all file for bankruptcy. They joined thousands of others. In fact, just doing a little Googling this morning, a Forbes report from a month ago said that the current count was over 12,000 retailers out of business in 2020 thus far. Industry executives in the article talk about the need for department stores to reinvent themselves, just like the last story you were talking about, especially here in the U.S. So the article really drew distinction between how retail is done here in the U.S. and how it's done in Europe and Japan and other places. So if they're going to survive, these industry analysts and retail veterans were all talking about how much it's got to change. One former retail CEO said that the issues for retailers here in the States goes back to the 80s. Quote, the focus became more about how to take care of the corporate office, not the customer. The same gentleman went on to say, quote, I was shocked at the lack of knowledge executives had about their customers. They spent too much time in the central office, end quote. So these insights come from Alan Questrom, former CEO of a variety of big retailers, including Neiman Marcus. I think he exited the industry in 2004. Rachel Schechtman, which is Macy's former brand experience officer, I think she exited in June, says, quote, two things that made department stores great were amazing customer service and great merchandise that you couldn't find elsewhere. It's almost impossible to name a store that does that today, end quote. Very true. Some executives in the article and elsewhere point to supply chain and how supply chain can help save U.S. retailers. hey, it's saving the world. It might as well save retail too, right, Greg?
One can only hope.
In the article, Stephen Sadove, who's former CEO of Saks Incorporated, he says retail leaders should embrace a hybrid wholesale retail model that is popular in Europe. Sadove points to Galeries Lafayette as a perfect example. Of course, you've got to have the creative fortitude to adjust your model, but you've got to have the ability to deliver and partner to establish a model like that. So, Greg, reading this article, for some reason, and you mentioned malls earlier, that's what this made me think of, because when I was growing up in the 80s, the mall and really the early 90s, perhaps, the mall was a place to be. You know, I grew up in Aiken. We finally got an Aiken mall back in the day, and it was like, oh, we've made it. Oftentimes, folks would go to Augusta, the Augusta Mall, and the now defunct Regency Mall, and it was a vibrant environment and shopping experience, right? And then I was thinking, and we've got plenty of great malls in the Metro Atlanta area. I'm not sure the last time I've set foot inside a mall, and while there's certainly different dynamics between the mall and general retailers and department stores, this article speaks to, but there is a lot of overlap.
Uh-oh.
So
I think Verizon is letting
Greg,
you down. Go ahead.
What are some of the things that this article and these quotes and so what's your article here?
Yeah. Let me qualify this, Scott, by saying I am a longtime retailer and I come from retail stock. My father was an executive at a company called Kmart back when they used to matter, which was a long, long time ago. And let me start with some recent news and work back into this discussion. So Simon, one of the largest mall operators, and Amazon just announced today that Amazon is considering a partnership with Simon where they'll start to put fulfillment facilities in JCPenney and Sears stores in malls. If that doesn't tell you how far malls have fallen, I don't know what possibly could awaken you to that. It doesn't seem that long ago that we were worried about all the kids hanging out in the malls. Doesn't that seem like 100 years ago now? But and all of that news has, to give you an example of where some of these formerly innovative retailers are, that has Sears and JCPenney stock soaring today, up 25%. So Penny's stock is up 25% to almost 30 cents a share. And Sears stock is up to almost 25% to almost 18 cents a share. Look, the days of these retailers being considered innovative or competent or customer caring are over. And they have been for a long time. They've been limping along for as long as they could. And that's why people feel so comfortable flooding away from these stores to bargain stores like Walmart or mid-price stores like Target and Belk and Kohl's and companies like that. It's because these companies ceased to add value a long, long time ago. And they're really just getting their comeuppance. One other point on the argument that Stephen Sadove, not to contradict, what the hell? I'm going to contradict the former CEO of Saks Incorporated. I don't disagree that we can learn something from European retail, but we have to be really, really careful because the density of population in Europe is substantially greater than in the United States. That might work in certain city centers, but it won't work universally throughout the United States. And I can give you a list of 100 plus retailers from Europe who've come to the States and failed to prove the point.
Excellent. You're right. Absolutely right. And love hearing, frankly, I forgot I was talking with a retail champion with someone with your degree of experience. I bet this is despite how challenging of a time, I bet it's just a fascinating time for someone that's been in retail as much as you have, and to see just how far we've gone away from what worked for so long, perhaps.
Well, as you know, as angry as I probably sound, it is. I mean, frankly, I am a little bit frustrated with companies that should have learned this lesson literally decades ago, and having come from an industry which is completely counterintuitive to having an advanced merchandising and supply chain strategy, the automotive auto parts industry. Some of the problems we solved literally, I have to check myself here, more than 2 decades ago.
Right.
All of our regular listeners will know what that means. More than 2 decades ago. I'm frustrated, frankly, to see a lot of these retailers begging for assistance for something they could easily have solved easily more than 2 decades ago, easily more than a decade ago. And some of them we've talked about before have been milking the government with multiple bankruptcies and milking their suppliers with multiple bankruptcies and other ploys to stay afloat. And frankly, they deserve to die. So there are some, and well, I'll just name them Macy's. I don't mean all of them. Like, I am really worried about Nordstrom, which is possibly the greatest retail organization in the history of the planet. And I'm worried about others that do deserve to continue on. But this is a great time to cull the herd and to uplift and bring business to the best operators in the industry and cut out the ones who are non-contributors to their supplier base or to the consumer.
All right. Good stuff there. We're going to keep driving.
100% opinion, in case anyone was wondering.
That's right. Supply Chain Now does not claim to, no, 100%.
Yeah, that's right. Whatever disclaimer we need to have, just consider it said.
Right. But, folks expect frank analysis and perspective here. And Greg, I appreciate you delivering. Okay. So real quick, I know we're a few minutes over our typical runtime. Evidently the gerbil that's on the wheel that's powering our internet is really it's getting worn out. So we're going to wrap up here quick, Greg. So, supply chain is boring. And This Week in Business History, 2 of our newest series, we invite our audience to check those out. Last live stream, we also talked about Tequila Sunrise. All of these are getting great feedback. Supply Chain is Boring in particular, Greg. Chris sat down on a 2-part series with John Hill, who is a data analytics and WMS pioneer, and a ton of really interesting feedback on that 2-part podcast interview. So good stuff there, Chris. And
we did consider data analysis boring. Now it is one of the most sought after jobs in any industry, data analytics. That is definitely worth listening to.
Clay says you sound like I've been Draco.
I must strike you.
All right. So great series. Supply Chain is Boring. Chris is doing some great work there. It's fascinating to hear some of the folks that he's sitting down and talking with. And then This Week in Business History, so different. It's 15, 20 minutes, kind of frankly,
not even about supply chain sometimes, right?
That's right. And part of the inspiration there is the rest of the story by the late and great Paul Harvey, where it was just a great story in a brief amount of time, delivered like only he could. So really, if you're ever curious, if you're a big history dork like I am, especially when it comes to business and kind of getting the story behind the story, that's kind of what we're after there. So the episode we published here today, we went into the Monopoly game, which really you could call that the landlord's game, because the person that got all the credit was not the person that actually invented the game. Y'all might want to look up Lizzie McGee, Magie, fascinating woman that lived decades ago. We dove into the FedEx story and Fred Smith. I learned some things about the one and only Fred Smith that I did not know. And Leo Fender, the founder, of course, of Fender, the iconic musical instrument company, which is still
the inventor of the Telecaster and the Stratocaster, 2 of the greatest solid body guitars of all time.
You are right, sir. You are right. And I learned some things there. So hope y'all check that out. Again, it's more of a broader approach. We dabble in a little bit of supply chain on This Week in Business History, but you can find both of these new series and, of course, the Tequila Sunrise series, which is all about an investment. And well, Greg, in a 30-second soundbite, what is Tequila Sunrise about?
It's all about supply chain tech and the people who love, start, follow, and invest in those companies. It's it's a lesson about what companies are making waves in the industry and who's investing and how they do it. So there's some insights there if you are a founder.
And yeah, I love it. Perfect niche. Greg was born for that podcast, amongst other things, but he was born for that. Quick, I want to thank Who's Your Daddy, one of our latest recommendation writers, maybe I'll call it. He says about supply chain is boring. Quote, anything but boring. Chris is a supply chain pro, and he challenges his guests to prove him wrong and show that supply chain is not boring. If you're looking for valuable information on what is right and wrong with the industry processes and approaches, this will not bore you. Good stuff there.
Isn't that the point?
That is the point.
Hey, on another front, please, for any of those series, Supply Chain is Boring, This Week in Business History, Tequila Sunrise, or Jamin's, the Jamin Experience also, go to wherever you get your podcasts, rate, review, subscribe. Yes, this is a shameless promotion.
Wait, but we bring the promotion. We bring it with an opportunity to get better at what you do, to know more, to increase your supply chain IQ, which, segueing, this webinar on August 19th is an excellent opportunity. Of course, everyone is talking, as Andrew put it earlier, it's COVID-19 24/7, right? And frankly, it should be. So there's no shortage of conversations around what post-COVID-19 supply chains, how it's going to work, what's going to take, how's it going to change. But here we've got the unique Rod Sherkin and Kelly Barner, who will be offering been there, done that perspective, and especially from a procurement standpoint. So sign up for that free webinar, and we're going to sweeten the pot a little bit, Greg.
Uh-oh.
We're not talking cannabis. We're going to sweeten the pot a little bit. That's right. And folks that caught the buzz last week, that might mean something to them. All right. So we are going to give away Z Beans coffee, a little gift pack, and we're going to make a drawing out of the folks that register from here until next Monday. And we'll recognize a winner on the buzz. So register, and who knows, you might get some excellent coffee from Ecuador, from the company. It's based right here in Georgia and Macon, Georgia, but all the coffee beans come from Ecuador. Good stuff there. All right. So Greg, if folks can't find something, where do they go?
They should do what we do, and they should just reach out to Amanda at supplychainnowradio.com. If there's ever anything we can't get done, we either reach out to Clay, and Clay does not want to be contacted, or our chief marketing officer, Amanda.
That is right. And at supplychainnowradio.com, you'll be able to find all the past podcast episodes, live streams, the webinars, and some other things there. And hey, if there is an episode focused on a particular subject that we haven't covered that's really relevant to you in the industry, hey, shoot us a note. We welcome your feedback. We enjoy it. It helps make us better, because we don't want to be like the folks that the former Neiman Marcus CEO is talking about, because for us, it is all about the customer and the audience. That's why we're here. So, and Clay even puts in the
what the heck?
breaking records here,
And hey, can I one more shout out, Scott, and then let you wrap up, and that is happy 125th birthday to the Wichita State University. Go Shocks.
Absolutely. We got to get Professor Mohib, AA, on the show at some point soon. We'll talk about the anniversary. But with that said, big thanks to our guest, Andrew Kelley, and the BoxLock team. We had a couple BoxLock folks with us as well, including Rusty Wiley. Congrats, Rusty, on your new position with BoxLock, company on the move. Fascinating story, technology, culture, you name it. Big thanks to all the audience. Love the comments, energy. I mean, you couldn't tell this is a Monday. Of course, most folks may not know it's Monday, right, Greg?
Right. Is it Monday? Are we sure?
But kidding aside, hey, do good, give forward, be the change that's needed, help somebody. Take a page out of Andrew's book, help somebody. And with that said, we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.